why don't you call the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and tell them the basics of this Visas for Terrorists program? And I did. I called headquarters. Went from office to office to office on the phone. And then they said, well, why don't you call the Washington field office? They'll take care of it. So I did. And I got the treatment at the Washington field office, going from subdivision to subdivision to subdivision. And eventually, the last office I talked to said, oh, we'll call you back. It's 9 years later, and I'm still waiting. And it's probably just as well, because I wanted to tell them about how the 15 of the 19 hijackers got their visas at this visa mill in Jeddah through the Central Intelligence Agency. And if they had really paid attention to what I was saying, I'd be at an undisclosed location being waterboarded by now. So I don't get any respect. The Washington Post, 60 Minutes, Los Angeles Times. I talked to the Los Angeles Times Bureau and spent, an hour and a half or so with them, telling them essentially what I've told you, giving them the names of these CIA people, and saying, look, you know, it's enough that they got visas under peculiar circumstances in violation of the law. And according to the Diplomatic Security's website at the State Department, the penalty for visa fraud is 10 years in jail and a $250,000 fine. And if it involves terrorism, as the 15 of the 19 supposedly were involved in, the time in jail jumps to 20 years plus a $250,000 fine. Well, they couldn't be bothered. Thank you for your time, thank you for the information, and that's it. But Joe Trento has given me some ink in some of his books. Greg Palast has done as well, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, Joe's book, Prelude to Terror, and Craig Unger's book, House of Bush, House of Saud. I got a couple of paragraphs in that. I'm up on the internet. I'm in Zero for all of 45 seconds, and that's, I think, on sale out there. I got an interview with Jason Burmis in his book Fabled Enemies, which is also out there. I'm on camera talking about Osama bin Laden. So, you know, it's going around and around and around, but it's never picked up by the mainstream media, or as Ray McGovern calls it, the fawning corporate media. So then I started writing letters. You know, I talked about this Visa Express program where Celerino Castillo told me he'd been a drug enforcement officer in Central America. He said that it's usual for the CIA to get people they're interested in to be brought to the United States undercover by simply getting their applications and their passports to a travel agency, which hauls them over to the American diplomatic post or consular post, and says, okay, you know, these guys are going on a study tour to the Grand Canyon or something. And bang, 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 they get the stamps and they're on their way. So I talked about this. I wrote letters to John Rockefeller, a Democrat from West Virginia, who had been, at that time, the vice chairman of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, to Jane Harman, who had been the ranking member at that time on the House Committee on Intelligence, and to Nancy Pelosi, who at the time was the leader of the Democrats in the House of Representatives. Dead silence. Not one word, not one question. Who the hell are you? Why are you asking these questions? Not one word. So I can only conclude that, well, yeah, they knew about this, that I was one of the few people in government who didn't know about this. Because the story of the problems with the Jeddah visas apparently had extended to the consulate in Marseille. I talked to a guy who had resigned from state over the wars in Yugoslavia, and he said, well, yeah, I was in Marseille, and I heard about this, but I never got any more information about it. So you say, okay, Mike, that was then. That was 20 years ago. This is now. This is the 21st century. This is the year 2010. Why is this important to us? Well, as I mentioned, 15 of the 19 hijackers according to the Los Angeles Times, got their visas from Jeddah. I thought that my complaining and my Freedom of Information Act requests and my letters had shut this thing down. Apparently didn't happen. So that's one thing. The other thing is, September 11th was used as a casus belli against the rest of the world, against the Arabs and against the Muslims, who are an awful lot of people, more than the people in the United States, more than the people in Europe combined. There's, I think, roughly 1 billion Muslims around the world. And the United States used this as a pretext to invade and destroy Iraq in violation of the Constitution and the law of nations. They've done this to Afghanistan, again in violation of the Constitution and the law of nations. And they plan to do it, apparently, to Iran. And they've destabilized Pakistan. They've looked the other way while the Israelis destroyed Lebanon and engaged in a vicious... Thank you. And they engaged in a vicious attack on the poor, benighted people living in poverty in Gaza. And Obama looked the other way. Thank you. Or as my Arab friends would say, shukran jazilan. So you can say, well, yeah, isolated occurrences, it was a casus belli, what's the connection? Well, the CIA trained and recruited these characters who were not allowed back into their own countries, as I was told by my contacts, because they learned how to blow things up and shoot things down. And Saudi Arabia and Syria and Pakistan and other places said, well, if we let these guys in and they're adept at regime change, look at Afghanistan and after the Soviets left, what's going to happen to our country? So they wouldn't let them in. And the CIA had this group of saddle tramps, rootless gunslingers, and I think, but can't prove, that they were used as a basis for an organization to send into places like Iraq and Afghanistan and Iran and Lebanon and Pakistan to destabilize those countries for the benefit of the American empire. Let's look at Iraq. I know more Iraqis than I know Pakistanis and Iranians. The Shia, the Sunni, and the Christians had lived in relative harmony for 1,000 years. And after the American invasion, everybody in the country was opposed to the imperial stormtroopers, the new crusaders. And after a while, suddenly, mirabile dictu, they began fighting each other. They assassinated the Shia assassinated the Sunni, someone killed the Chaldean Catholics in the north. Well, who did this? People who lived in harmony for 1,000 years? No, it was, I think, these people that they had recruited, that Alex Jones is beginning to call the Islamic Legion, to go wherever and whenever they're needed. And they've been caught at this. The British were caught. A couple years ago, there was a group of Special Air Service people, folks from the intelligence services, who were caught with bombs and detonators and so forth. And they were arrested by the Iraqi police. And the British Army sent tanks and soldiers to free them. And you don't think that they were not training up people, using these people that already knew how to destroy buildings and people? There's a problem with Iraqis trying to get asylum in the United States because they were employed by United States government agencies in Iraq, and these people were engaged in what they say were crimes against other people. They tortured, they murdered, they did other things. And this is a major problem because under the Immigration and Nationality Act, you can't get a visa to come live in the United States as an asylee or as a refugee if you engage in any of these activities. So they're trying to sanitize their backgrounds and get them into this country. So, everybody loses.